Hello and welcome to the Final Frontiersmen, a YouTube channel about all things Trek with a heavy focus on the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game. I'm Bill, and this is the first episode of a new series of videos I'm planning to put out called Star Trek Adventures Academy. This series is designed to help, maybe not teach the rules. I don't want to step in place of the rulebook and take away from the rulebook, but maybe as a rules refresher or pointing out the basic things to take away and that you should know about the rules in general when you're playing the game. So if you're a new player and you read the rulebook, but you want just a little more clarity on what it means, or maybe you just do better hearing it rather than reading it, or maybe you're returning to the game after a while and you want a refresher, I hope these videos help serve that role. Alright, so for the first episode 1, I hope these are going to be short-ish videos. This episode, I want to cover two topics. First, I just want to do an overview on the character sheet. And number 2, I want to go over the basic task mechanics, the basic core mechanics of a general task in the game, because that is pretty much what 80% of the rules that you'll deal with, or more, will be when you play the game. So I think as a player coming in, maybe a new player, maybe someone who needs a refresher, knowing those core mechanics or just having a grasp on it will take you through almost every single incident that you'll encounter in the game. So this episode's going to cover just overview the character sheet and those basic core mechanics. So let me jump into my window. Let's take a look at a character sheet and we will talk about it. The reason why I'm going to do an overview and not tell you how to build a character is because, as usual, I will refer you to BC Holmes managed online character creator. That site is genius. That site is going to do all the heavy lifting for you. Make sure you don't make a mistake. It's great to read the rulebook, learn how to make the characters on your own. But honestly, when you have something that well made and also supported and endorsed by Modifius, you might as well make use of it. Plus, it will print out a character sheet for you in the end. So taking a look at this, let's just go down real quick through the sheet, straight from top. This is one of my old characters I pulled out and I adapted for a current online game I'm playing. But this is the old version of the sheet. So you had name, you had the species, you have your rank, environment. This comes up during character creation, like where were they raised, upbringing, what's your assignment on your current ship for the series that you're doing, and any traits that your character might have. All of this, of course, comes up as you do the life path options in character creation. So these are the background and just general information about your character. That's clear. Now, you'll see there are two sets of stats. There are attributes and there are disciplines. Attributes have control, fitness, presence, daring, insight, and reason. And these are typical of your attributes in any role-playing game. Control is, of course, how focused you are and how you are able to maintain control and cool in the heat of the moment. Fitness is how athletic you are and how much endurance you have. Present is your willpower. Daring is, as it says, daring. It's your ability to act, maybe dangerously. Insight is your inner wisdom. It's similar to reason, which is your knowledge, your gained academic knowledge and applying the reason. But insight is more using your I was going to say insight, clearly. It's using your internal wisdom to figure things out. So these are the first set, and now you have a second set. You have command, security, science, con, engineering, and medicine. These line up with, of course, the departments and the roles you would find in Star Trek. Command, of course, is leadership. Security, of course, fighting. Science is for analyzing. Con is for piloting and starship operations. Engineering for repairing. Medicine for, of course, health. So when you do a task role in the game, which we'll get to next, you are combining one of each of these two sets. You're combining one attribute and one discipline. So the majority of what you are doing falls within these two sets of skills that you are, stats, I should say. Now, I said the word skills, and if you notice on the sheet, there are no skills like in a classic or traditional role-playing game like Pilot Ship or Phasers. You might see over here in focuses similar things, but these are not skills themselves. They do not get points in them. The only things with points are here in your attributes and your disciplines, these two sets. And the reason why this is so great is because it helps to highlight how well-rounded Starfleet officers are. So pretty much in any situation, you have a similar chance of success in that discipline, in that ability. So if you were doing like a, just for example, if you were doing a hand-to-hand combat, that's usually daring and security. So you would add your daring and your security, and that is your total. Now, let's say you're doing something else action-wise. It's not hand-to-hand combat, but you use daring and security again because you have that same ability in all things that are related to that kind of an act. So that's one thing I really like about the game. You don't really have to manage skills a lot. Now, what are focuses then? If they're not skills, what are they? Focuses are things that your character is specially trained on. For example, this character, Doran, he's trained in power systems, sensors, transporters and replicators, phasers, improvisation, quantum mechanics. These are very open. These are very flexible. There are lists of focuses available, but those are also just suggestions. You are able to create any kind of focus that makes sense for your character and, of course, that your GM allows. Now, what they do is, because they are not skills, if you're doing an action where a focus applies to that situation, let's say that you are running a sensor scan, so that's control and science. Okay, you're using sensors. Well, you are specially trained. You are proficient in using sensors and analyzing sensors. So the focus applies in that, and that gives you an added bonus or an added boost to getting a critical success when you make that roll. It doesn't let you roll extra dice. It just increases your chances for a critical success. So that's what focuses are. They're pretty easy to use. The whole game is pretty easy and straightforward. And as I said, I like the fact there are not huge lists of skills that you have to manage. The next thing down here is values. Values have two purposes. One, they are a narrative assistant for your character. As you're creating your character, you will determine these 4 values that you start with. And these kind of shape who your character is based on what they've experienced. The values I have for Doran here are: no one's ever really gone. If you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. In for a penny, in for a pound, and necessity is the mother of invention. Now again, these kind of shape who your character is to inform how you roleplay. But there's also a mechanical aspect that I will get to in a future episode when we talk about values and determination, which is here. Every episode you start with 1 point of determination, and they connect to the mechanical aspect that you can apply from your values. But just like focuses, or I should say even more than focuses, values are extremely flexible because like they're any kind of saying, they're any kind of slogan or motto or just thing that drives your character or that your character lives by. Going down here, stress is similar to hit points in this game, where this is about as much damage or just I don't know if damage is entirely the correct thing, but stress, it's as much of a beating your character can take before they're easily taken out of the picture. That'll come up when we talk about combat. Talents are the mechanical aspect, the mechanical keywords that you get in the game. Now these, unlike focuses, unlike values, there are sets of them that you can choose from. Some are maybe species related, such as join for a trill. Others are maybe connected to whatever your rank, or I should say role, is on the starship. And others are general that anyone can take that maybe fits what your vision of the character is. And all of them have different mechanical abilities, maybe letting you roll extra dice, maybe granting you advantages. There's a whole slew of them, and they're available in various books. But again, if you use BC Holmes Character Creator, you'll have the list there. You could go through them very easily and be able to figure out what you want for your character. Injuries, as you imagine, if your character gains any injuries, you could put them there. They are not too big of an element in this game, but they can serve similar to traits, and they could affect the way rolls perform if you still have lingering injuries. Next is weapons. These are the weapons that your character typically has, although it's very easy to get other weapons and equipment in the game because it's Star Trek, and usually you're not left wanting for anything. You'll see the name of the weapon here, any kind of qualities that they have, and again, we'll go through these in a later episode when we talk about combat. And then by the delta sign here, this is how much damage that you roll, or how many challenge dice that you roll that may cause damage. So here you see 5, here you see 4. Unarmed strike on its own gives you 1 combat die, or 1 challenge die. Phaser type 1 gives you 2, and then you add your character's security rating to that, and you write the total here, so 5 and 4. And the other one, other equipment, this is just the other stuff you have. Again, most equipment in Star Trek Adventures doesn't necessarily have a mechanical benefit. It just helps affect the scene, affect the roles you do. Again, very similar to traits. Now, some of them do have some bonuses or some mechanical elements that they could give you in your task. But in general, a lot of this game being a very narrative game, a lot of it comes down to how you frame what is going on. So these equipment, these things, they act more like traits to help color the scene that you're in and determine whether it's easier or more difficult, or if it's likely or not likely that you're even able to do it. So that is basically the character sheet on its own. Now, I will recommend, if I can, when you do the character sheet on BC Holmes Character Creator, if you do, I recommend going into or printing out this version that includes the talent and what they do in a sidebar there. Makes it so much easier for you to understand exactly what things do. So if you can't remember off the top of your head, you have it right there. You could check constantly. So I do recommend using this version of the character sheet. So that is the character sheet, and that is pretty much important to knowing before we go into the basic task, because really the attributes and disciplines are the main thing you're going to be using, with focuses also playing a heavy role. So knowing where they are on your sheet and what they do, that's very crucial. So let's get into the basic task mechanics. As I said before, if you know these basic task rules, this is going to cover probably about 80% or more of everything you'll encounter as a player in Star Trek Adventures. So let's get into it. When you are in a situation where success or failure is going to be important, that's when the GM should call for a task roll. If it's something that you're going to be able to do easily, or something that's natural for you, like just piloting the ship like normal, if you're the con officer, you shouldn't have to do a roll for everything. The task roll should really only come when success or failure makes a difference in the story. Now, there are times where you could make rules where it doesn't matter, you're going to succeed no matter what, but we'll get into that in a second. In general, once there is such a situation where you have to make the roll, the GM will call for a task roll and set the difficulty usually between 1 and 5. Sometimes you'll have a 0 difficulty roll, as I mentioned before. It might be something that is going to succeed no matter what. However, there are reasons to call for a 0 difficulty, and sometimes things might be massively impossible, almost completely unfathomably impossible. So you might bump up the difficulty to 6, 7, 8, who knows where. But in general, 1 to 5 is the range for a task in Star Trek Adventures. So once the number is set, the GM might tell you to make a roll with 1 attribute and 1 discipline. They might tell you which one to roll, but in Star Trek Adventures, as I mentioned before, it's a very narrative game, and the attributes, the disciplines, they're very open-ended. So it's easy for you as a player to make a case for a different combination of using this attribute and this discipline instead of what the GM suggested. And if the GM agrees with you, you can roll that one, because there's so much that you could apply in the game. So the GM might say that this is a reason plus science roll, but you might argue that yes, it is a reason science roll, but for my character, and that this is something about how a starship is run, so I think that might be a con roll. And since I'm not actually knowledgeable on it, I just know about starship operation, perhaps it's more insight for me to think about this situation and how that applies. So I would request an insight and con roll as opposed to a reason and science in this case. Very, very open. Don't be afraid to explore your creativity with the combinations. One time a roll might be attribute A and discipline A, and the next time it's the exact same situation, but it's attribute B and discipline C, perhaps. So don't be afraid to be creative and just use your imagination in how these combinations work. Okay, going on to once you make the determination of which one to roll, this is the 2d20 system, so you are rolling 2 20-sided dice. You add up, as mentioned before, 1 attribute, 1 discipline. That total number of adding them together, that is your target number. When you roll your 2 dice for this task, if either of them, if you get that number or less, that target number or less on either the dice roll or die rolls, that is a success. So if you add up, again, looking at Doran, his control is 12, his security is 3, that's 15. If he rolls a 15 or less, he is getting 1 success. If both dice roll a 15 or less, they're both getting a success, so that's 2 successes. Now, as I mentioned, the GM could set the difficulty between 1 and 5. So if you're rolling 2d20 and you get 2 successes, but the difficulty's 3, you still fell. How does that work? Well, if you roll a 1 on your dice, the lowest value possible, that's a critical success. That counts as 2 successes. So if you roll 1 on either of those dice, there's 2 successes. If you roll a 1 on both of the dice, you just got 4 successes on those 2 dice. Not too hard to understand, right? That's easy. But there's also the chance that, as I said, difficulty might be 5, might be 6, might be insane. You can only get 4 maximum. Even though it's a 2d20 system, that just means the active character is typically rolling 2 20-sided dice for the action, but actually, the pool that the active player can roll can go up to 5 dice. And the way you do this is, well, there's a number of ways you could do this. Some talents, as we looked at on the character sheet, might give you an additional die for your action. Your value use with determination might buy you an additional die that counts as a success, but we'll get into that in another episode, because that could be a little bit tricky. But when we get into values, I'll explain that. But the most typical way is there are currencies in the game. One is momentum for players. Momentum is basically the player currency. And there's a second GM, I don't want to say negative currency, GM currency called threat. Either one of those might be able to buy up to 3 extra dice for you. You start with 2, you could buy up to 3. So you could have up to 5 dice. Now the way it works when you're buying dice like this, it's you spend one point of, or you use 1 point of currency to get the first die. You spend 2 more points of currency to get the next die, and you spend 3 points of currency to get the third die. So if you start with 2 and you buy the last 3 to get your maximum of 5 dice to roll, that in total will cost you 6 points of currency, whether it's momentum, threat, or a combination of both. One thing I see get incorrect many times throughout a lot of videos, and also just reading posts on social media, is how these purchases work. As I mentioned before, talents and also values with determination. Talents might give you an extra die already for whatever role you're going to do. So let's say I have a talent that grants me a bonus die on this roll. I have 3 dice. I want to buy 1 more. How much does it cost? It costs 2. Even though I haven't bought a single die yet, I already have the first die that's extra to my roll provided for free. So I have to pay 2 for die number 4. And then if I want 1 more, I have to pay 3. So even though I'm buying 2 dice, it's still costing me 5 because I got the first die, the first bonus die, the roll, for free. The way I like to tell people when they're confused on it, or the players I'm working with, is don't look at it as buying the dice, because a lot of the times the mistake is, oh, okay, I got my third die free from talent, I want to buy 1 more die, that's only 1 point. So I'm spending 1 point, I'm getting number 4, I want to spend another one, that's 2 more points, so I only spent 3 points, and I'm still rolling all 5 dice. That's incorrect. The way I tell them to think about it is, you are not buying the dice. You are buying the die slot. So you're rolling 2d20 and you have 3 bonus slots. That first slot gets filled up with any free dice that you get that is not spent with momentum or threat. Any dice that's given to you that you are not actually paying for always takes up the earlier spots. So if a talent gives me 1 bonus die, that's going into slot number 1, which would normally cost 1 point of momentum or threat. If I use a point of determination now, and that's getting me the second bonus die, that's taken up slot number 2, which normally would cost 2 points to buy. The only slot that's left available for me to spend currency on is slot number 3. Slot number 3 is 3 points. So even though I'm only buying 1 point in this situation, or 1 die in this situation, I'm spending the maximum number of points, 3 points for a single die, because the free dice get slotted first. Remember that. Okay? Now, where are we going with this? So you could get up to 5 dice. So in theory, you could roll 10 successes if you have 5 dice. Never seen it happen. I would love to see it happen. But you could roll 10 successes if you buy all 5 dice, if you're rolling all 5 dice. Now, another way you could get critical success, as I mentioned before, if you roll a 1, that's a critical success. But if you have a focus that applies, in our earlier example, we were talking about using the sensors. My sensor focus applied. That means that not just 1, but my discipline value, that whole range, if the die roll comes up inside that range, then I also score. a critical success. So for Doran, his science is 4. So he was doing control plus science for the sensors roll. That's 15. Anything 15 or less is going to be a success, but his sensor focus applies. That means that his science discipline is 4. So any roll that is a 4 or less now counts as 2 successes. So that's how focuses help increase the odds of your critical success without actually giving you extra dice or anything like in a typical role-playing game where it's adding to your roll or making you roll more. So that's pretty much the ease and the smoothness of the system and how you can use focuses. Now, along with critical successes, there's also, of course, critical failures, or in this case called complication. So if you're rolling a 1, the lowest value you could get on a d20, that is a critical success. The opposite is the maximum you could roll, and that's a 20. If you roll a 20, that is going to be a complication. And a complication, aside from also not giving you any success as a 20, it's also going to create a complication, what it's called. A complication is typically a negative trait that is applied to the situation or applied to what you're doing, or it could also generate 2 points of threat, the GM's currency, as I mentioned before. So complications are the opposite of critical success. Now, here's the trickier thing. It's very possible in some extreme situations that a complication can also be a success because the complication range can increase. So if you have, most rolls are complication range of 1, which means there's no change at all. It's only the first point, which is 20. If there's a complication range of 2, that means 20 and 19. Complication range of 3, 20, 19, 18. Now, there might be some really extreme situations that a GM puts you through that maybe takes a complication range all the way down to 16, perhaps. And you might have a combination of your attribute and discipline that goes up to 16. So you roll a 16, you succeed, you get a success, but you also gain the complication. So even though 9 times out of 10, a complication, rolled complication, is going to indicate you failed on that die, it doesn't automatically mean that. You just have to go with what the values are and just go with it there. That's one of those yes, but situations. Okay. Now, another way that you could have extra dice on these rolls, as the active player, you're rolling 2d20. You can roll a maximum of 5d20 for these rolls, but you could have other players or even the ship itself assist you in that roll. Now, when a player or the ship, now the ship always assists when the ship is doing an assist roll. It only rolls 1d20. So the ship is always going to roll 1d20 when it's helping you. But when a player is assisting you, they are not the active player. They are the supporting player in that roll. They are only rolling 1d20. So you're making your roll, and that's separate. Then they roll for themselves 1d20 to assist you. So you might buy up to 5 dice. You have your 5, and you're still being assisted by another player. That's a 6 die. 6 die in the pool, but not for you. You're the active player. Your maximum is 5. You max that out. Has nothing to do with the 1d20 that the supporting player is giving. It's very possible that multiple players could support you, and maybe even the ship itself. That's up to the discretion of the GM and should be done as to what makes sense for a scene. Like, you're not going to have 5 people jump in like it's Captain Planet and all of them push the phaser button down in your hand. So that's unlikely. That's not going to make any sense. That's going to be too goofy. You should do what makes sense, but you could have multiple players assist you. Each of them will roll 1d20. Focuses still apply for them. but they're only rolling the 1d20. You're the active player. It's your roll. Now, here's another thing that I see mistake being made. Well, one of them, of course, is a lot of people count that assisting roll as part of the 5 dice you can roll. Nope. You got 5. They're separate. But another thing I see frequently, or I have seen done incorrectly in the past with these assist rolls are, let's say we only needed 1 success. The active player, I roll my 2d20s, 2 failures, but my supporting player, oh, good old Lieutenant Dan, he comes in, he rolls his 1 die, he gets a success. We got our 1 success. We win. No, you don't. The active player has to gain at least 1 success in order for the roll to succeed. So if you need 3 successes, and as the active player, you only roll 1 success, and all the support gives you the last 2 successes, you succeed. But if the lead player rolls 0 successes, it doesn't matter what the support gives, the roll fails, because the person who's actually doing it does not succeed. So picture it this way. It doesn't matter how well your friend on the side flips the light switch. If you didn't get the light bulb screwed in, you're not going to see. So that's what it means. You need to be successful, at least partially, as the lead player, as the active player, in order for the assisting rolls to count. So do not forget that. That's one of the main points. Another thing, because the game is so free, it's so open, another big thing is that the active player, the combination of attribute and discipline that they are rolling for their part of the active roll doesn't necessarily mean the support has to roll that same combination. Their support might be coming in a different method, a different manner, a whole different technique. So it's up to the players and the GM to determine exactly what combination is right for both the active player and for the supporting player. So don't think that if the active player is doing a control plus science, the support also must do a control plus science. There are so many ways that the supporting players could support that helps the active players succeed. So be creative. Use that Star Trek knowledge that you've seen on TV. How are they going to come together? How are they going to work as a team to get to succeed? Doesn't mean they're doing the exact same task. So keep that in mind. Before I end this, I think I'll mention the next episode I'm going to go into momentum and threat a little bit more, or a lot more, I should say. But before I go on this, I mentioned before there may be a difficulty 0 task. And you might say, well, why would you want to do that? If you know you're succeeding, why would you even roll? Because sometimes there's difficulty 0 tasks that are done basically to generate momentum. Because any success you get over the difficulty number will gain you a point of momentum. And in the next episode, we'll talk about momentum, but it caps out in the pool at 6. You could have 6 points of momentum in your pool, which is shared by all players. And you can spend, of course, you could spend it as it's coming in. Sometimes there's bonus momentum, but we'll get into that next time. But in order to generate more momentum, you want to roll more successes. So that's why buying extra dice, even though you might be spending momentum, it's still a good idea because it encourages you, or I should say, it increases your odds of gaining not just that momentum back, but extra momentum that other players can use for their turns, for their actions. So it's always a great idea to do that. It's always a great idea when somebody can support you, to support you, even though it looks like you might be okay, because that can generate more momentum for you. But also on the flip side, rolling 20s, rolling complications, that might generate more threat for the GM. But we're going to cover all of the momentum and threat stuff in the next episode. I think those are the basic mechanics. Again, going through, just any roll, GM sets a difficulty, typically 1 to 5, As the player and GM, you will discuss which is the best combination of which one attribute and which one discipline goes together. Total that up. That's your target number. You're rolling your 2d20 for. Any die that has that number or lower is giving you a success. Any die that rolls a 1 is giving you 2 successes. If you have a focus that applies to the roll, look at your discipline value. Any roll that is equal or less to that value, that's giving you 2 successes as well. And you want more dice, you can buy it with momentum or by gaining threat for the GM. 1 point for the first slot, 2 points for a second slot, 3 points for the third slot. That's up to 5 points. Any support that comes your way is only rolling 1 die, and they do not need to roll the exact same combination that you did. Again, it's up to the GM. All right, let me jump out of here. That is the overview of the character sheet and the basic core mechanics of playing the game. That's going to get you through the majority of the rules that you have to make when you're playing Star Trek Adventures. 3 GM tips I have before I go. Tip number 1. I wrote them a while ago, so let me read what I actually wrote. Do they even make sense? So tip number 1 for GMs, this is tips for you. Tip number 1, let your players shine, okay? Don't try to design your task to negate their strengths. So if you see they have a focus that applies to a role, don't try to find a way that would count that focus out. Let them use that focus. Let them use that talent. Let them use that value. So anything that's going to really let them show off what they can do as a Starfleet officer, please let them show off. There are so many ways to make the game fun and challenging without trying to hamper the players by cutting out what they're best at. Next, don't ask for a task roll unless you're willing to let them fail. Okay? If there's a situation where the players definitely need to pass in order for your story to play out the way it needs to play out, don't put in the risk of them failing, because I'm telling you, they're going to fail. It doesn't matter if it's a difficulty 0 task where they can't fail at all because it's difficulty 0. They're going to find a way and they're going to fail. Never put a task in front of your players that has a chance of failure if you're not willing to let them fail. And I've seen that happen. I've been in a game when that has happened. I have run games where I've done that in the past where I'm like, why did I do that? Do not do that. Do not do that. Don't call for a task roll when you need them to succeed. Be ready for what a failure means when you ask for a task roll. And the last piece of advice, GM advice for this episode is keep a copy of your players' focuses, their talents, and their values on hand. Keep that with you. Be familiar with what they are, those 3 sets, so you're able to incorporate them into the challenges that you make in the game, and you're able to provide opportunities that allow the players to say, hey, wait, I have this talent. Does that apply here? And you can say like, yeah, I think it does. Have that ready so you know the best way to let your players shine. Like I said in tip number 1, that is why I recommend having that second character sheet that I said from the BC Holmes character creator, because it lists what all the talents do. It's good for you as a GM to print out a copy of the character sheet for all your players. Have that in front of you, know exactly what they can do and what their strengths are, so you could provide them those moments where they can recognize their own strengths and they can shine. Okay, and that's it. That is the end of lesson 1 for STA Academy. I hope that was helpful. I hope for any new players who need just a little bit of a refresher on the rules, or any old players coming back want a refresher, I hope that helps. As I said in the beginning, if you notice anything I said here being incorrect, please point it out to me. I think I covered everything in my notes. So that's it. That's it for this one. Class dismissed. In the next episode, I will be talking about threat and momentum, how to gain it, how to use it, what it all means. But until then, Thank you for watching. Stay safe out there, everyone. As always, live long and prosper. Peace and long life. See ya.